My name is Ezekiel Thorne. I'm a water engineer who survived the first week of the WW3 apocalypse when the rain stopped falling. 7 days ago, our water systems were sabotaged by climate weapons. Now I'm hunted by military forces who want my knowledge of hidden water sources. The city is dying of thirst while I race to reach a secret aquifer that could save dozens of lives. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. I need to be quiet. There are people searching above me. I can hear their footsteps through the ceiling. My name is Ezekiel Thorne, but everyone calls me Zeke. I'm 38 years old, and I worked, as a water systems engineer for the New Orleans Municipal Water Authority. For the past 7 days, I've been hiding in this auxiliary control room beneath what's left of our main water treatment facility. I'm recording this as both a historical account and a survival guide. If you're watching this, then somehow this recording made it out, and maybe that means there's still hope. I never thought my job would become a matter of life and death. Before all this, I maintained water treatment facilities, worked on flood control systems, and handled emergency response when water mains broke or treatment chemicals needed adjusting. It was technical work, important but ordinary. Growing up in the lower Ninth Ward and surviving Hurricane Katrina as a teenager shaped everything about my life choices. Watching my neighborhood drown, losing family members to the floodwaters. It changed me. I joined the Army Corps of Engineers after college, learned everything I could about water infrastructure, then came back home to fix the systems that had failed us. What I didn't know was how valuable and dangerous this knowledge would become. The warning signs were there for months, though none of us connected the dots until it was too late. The weather patterns had been strange, severe drought in regions that should be wet, flooding in typically dry areas. As a water engineer, I monitored these changes because they affected our treatment protocols, but I assumed it was just climate change accelerating. Then came the water quality readings. Subtle changes in mineral content, microscopic anomalies that didn't match historical data. I filed reports. They disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. 3 weeks ago, we received a government briefing about potential cyber threats to water infrastructure. They increased security at all facilities, added armed guards at the main treatment plant. They told us it was precautionary. I started preparing anyway. I mapped emergency water sources, stocked supplies at my apartment, and continued my off-books project, mapping unknown aquifers beneath the city that weren't on official records. It was technically against protocol, but after Katrina, I didn't trust official records to save lives when systems failed. I always thought I was preparing for another Katrina. I was preparing for something much worse. The last normal day was a Tuesday. I remember because we had our weekly systems check meeting. My colleague Rodriguez was showing me unusual server activity he'd noticed. Random port scans, subtle probing of our digital infrastructure. Nothing that triggered alarms, but enough to make us uneasy. Could be nothing, he said, but better safe than sorry. Around noon, I got a call from my old Army Corps commander, Colonel Westfield. He never called without reason. "Zeke," he said, his voice tight, "something big is coming. Can't say more on an open line. Trust your instincts." He hung up before I could ask questions. The news that afternoon showed unusual military movements globally. Diplomatic communications suddenly ceased between major powers. Financial markets plummeted. By evening, the first emergency alert came through on everyone's phones. A vague warning about potential infrastructure disruptions and instructions to fill bathtubs and containers with water as a precaution. Rodriguez and I looked at each other, and without discussion, both decided to stay overnight at the facility. "Just in case," we said. We called our emergency contacts with prearranged code words, telling them to implement their emergency plans. I had convinced Rodriguez months ago to prepare his family for water disruption scenarios. He thought I was paranoid. Now he thanked me. As the sun set that evening, we heard the first distant sirens. That was the last sunset of the old world. By morning, everything would change. I woke to the sound of alarms blaring throughout the facility. Our monitoring systems were lighting up with alerts, pressure drops across the network, unusual flow patterns, automated systems failing. Rodriguez was already at his terminal, frantically trying to override automatic shutdowns. "It's not just us," he shouted over the alarms. "Reports coming in from water systems nationwide. Coordinated cyber attack." We worked frantically to maintain pressure and prevent contamination backflow into the clean water reserves. Within 2 hours, the government confirmed what we already suspected. Hostilities had begun. World War III was underway, but not with troops and tanks. It started with attacks on infrastructure, water, power, communications, and precision drone strikes on key military installations. The first drones hit the naval facility just 3 miles from us. We felt the impact through the floor. By midday, we had implemented emergency water protocols, closing off sections of the city grid to preserve pressure in critical areas, hospitals, emergency services. Every hour brought worse news as modern civilization began to crumble on our monitors. Treatment chemicals were running low. Backup generators were failing at pumping stations, and military officials were suddenly very interested in our mapping data. That evening, as exhaustion set in after working non-stop, we saw the first reports about attacks on water infrastructure globally. Major cities around the world were experiencing the same cascading failures. Then came the weather maps. Meteorologists were baffled by the emerging patterns, storm systems abruptly dissipating, cloud formations moving against prevailing winds, rain suddenly stopping mid-storm. One meteorologist on the emergency broadcast used the phrase atmospheric manipulation before the feed cut out. We thought we were dealing with a cyber attack. We didn't understand we were seeing the first deployment of the Rainmaker. By morning of the second day, water pressure was failing in multiple city sectors. Our phones were flooded with reports of panic buying, violence at grocery stores and water distribution points. Military vehicles rolled through the streets as rumors of martial law spread. Rodriguez got a call from his wife. Their neighborhood had lost water completely. The fear in his voice as he spoke to her changed something in him. "I have to go check on them," he said, gathering his things. "My daughter's insulin needs refrigeration." I understood his choice. "We'll split up and meet back here in 6 hours," I told him. "Take the southeast maintenance tunnels. They'll be safer than the streets." I gave him my spare water filter and some purification tablets. That was the last time I saw him alive. With Rodriguez gone, I needed to make a decision. Stay at the facility where I could potentially help maintain the city's dwindling water supply, or try to reach his family. The engineer in me said, stay, but the human in me couldn't abandon them. I gathered emergency supplies, a portable water testing kit, and my personal filtration system before heading out. The streets were almost unrecognizable after just 24 hours. National Guard checkpoints had been established at major intersections. People were already standing in long lines at the few functional water distribution points. I avoided main roads, instead using my knowledge of the water infrastructure to navigate through maintenance access points and underground service tunnels. My ID badge still worked for these secure areas, a small mercy. Moving through the tunnels, I could track the progression of the crisis by the water pressure gauges. Neighborhoods that showed zero pressure would be in chaos above. I emerged 6 blocks from Rodriguez's home in Gentilly, close enough to see the first truly violent confrontation of the crisis. A water distribution truck had been surrounded by desperate residents. When the workers announced they were out of supplies, the crowd surged forward. I saw guards fire warning shots. Some people scattered. Others became more aggressive. I slipped away before seeing how it ended, the sounds of shouting fading behind me. Rodriguez's neighborhood was eerily quiet when I arrived. Many homes already appeared abandoned. The front door of his house was ajar, and inside I found signs of a hasty departure. Family photos missing from walls, essential medications gone from the bathroom cabinet, emergency bags no longer in the hall closet where he'd told me they kept them. On the kitchen counter was a note, "Gone to sister's place in Baton Rouge. Couldn't wait." It was dated that morning. I felt relief knowing they'd evacuated, but as I turned to leave, I heard movement upstairs. Drawing the pipe wrench from my belt, I quietly moved toward the staircase. 2 men were ransacking the bedroom, stuffing electronics into bags. Neither was armed with more than a kitchen knife, but in that moment, they were as dangerous as soldiers. I had what they desperately wanted, a full canteen of clean water and knowledge of where to find more. One spotted me and lunged forward. I swung the wrench not to injure but to deter. It connected with the banister instead, the sound enough to make them reconsider. "Water department," I said, holding up my badge. "This house is scheduled for inspection for contamination. You need to evacuate immediately." The official tone and uniform worked. They fled past me, unwilling to risk whatever contamination might mean. By nightfall of day 2, I knew this wasn't temporary. The world we knew was already gone. I made my way back toward the water treatment facility, witnessing the rapid collapse of social order. The military presence had increased dramatically, but they weren't restoring services. They were securing critical infrastructure for their own purposes. When I finally reached the facility perimeter, I knew something was wrong. Military vehicles surrounded the main entrance, and soldiers were checking identification against a list. Rather than approach directly, I moved to an observation point and watched. What I saw chilled me. Water Authority employees being separated into 2 groups. One group was escorted inside. The other was loaded into transport vehicles. There was no sign of Rodriguez. I overheard fragments of conversation between 2 soldiers on perimeter patrol. "Rainmaker deployment confirmed successful in target regions," one said. "Water control protocols now in effect." The other responded, "Command says we've got 72 hours before civilian unrest reaches Phase 3 parameters." They weren't there to help restore water, they were there to control who got it. I retreated to an emergency access point and used my keycard to enter the facility through the underground maintenance tunnels. Moving carefully through the darkened corridors, I made my way to the central monitoring station. Most staff had been removed, replaced by military personnel with minimal technical knowledge. From my hiding place in the utility shaft, I witnessed the exact moment when the rain patterns shifted unnaturally across the weather monitoring screens. A high-ranking officer was explaining to his team, "The Rainmaker technology affects atmospheric moisture patterns by introducing aerosol catalysts at specific altitudes. We can create drought or flooding with precision targeting. Current deployment has stopped rainfall completely in these regions." He indicated a map with several major population centers highlighted, including New Orleans. I watched the sky that evening through a high window as the clouds literally parted on command. No natural force did that. The military announced controlled water distribution would begin the following day, with citizens required to register for rations. Their carefully worded statement avoided mentioning when, or if, regular water service would be restored. With the facility under military control, I needed access to the secure servers to understand what was happening and potentially how to help people survive it. I found Rodriguez's security badge on a desk in the control room. He had made it back after all. But where was he now? I searched cautiously, avoiding patrols, downloading critical water infrastructure data onto a portable drive while setting up emergency backdoor access to monitoring systems. What I found in those classified files confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't just a war, it was population engineering through water control. The Rainmaker weather manipulation technology had been deployed globally, creating artificial drought in some regions while flooding others. The documents outlined population redistribution protocols based on water availability. Certain regions were designated as unsustainable and scheduled for resource deprioritization. My city was on the deprioritization list. I was copying the last of the files when the building shook violently. A precision strike had hit the eastern wing of the facility. Alarms blared as smoke filled the corridors. In the chaos of evacuation, I saw military personnel abandoning their posts, leaving civilian workers behind as they rushed to secure vehicles. An injured technician was trapped under fallen equipment. Despite the risk, I couldn't leave her there. I helped free her and guided her toward an emergency exit before the second strike hit. The facility that had been my professional home for years was partially destroyed before my eyes. As I watched it burn from a safe distance, I realized that everything I'd trained for had prepared me for exactly this moment. I just hadn't known it. With the valuable water system data secured and the facility compromised, I slipped into the increasingly lawless city, now a man with knowledge worth killing for. The first day on my own was the hardest. I found shelter in an abandoned maintenance shed near the industrial canal, far enough from population centers to avoid immediate danger, but close enough to water infrastructure to be useful. I took inventory of what I had: my emergency pack with 3 days of rations, water purification tablets, basic tools, the data drive with water system information, and, most importantly, my knowledge. That first night I studied the data I'd stolen, trying to make sense of the bigger picture. The Rainmaker technology was more advanced than anyone outside military circles knew. It didn't just stop rain, it could redirect moisture patterns with precision, effectively weaponizing the water cycle itself. Targeted regions would experience rapid dehydration while others would be deliberately flooded. The documents showed this wasn't a temporary tactic, but a long-term strategy for resource control. They believed whoever controlled water controlled the population. By morning of the third day, I needed to move. The maintenance shed wasn't sustainable, and I had information that could help people survive. I carefully made my way toward a residential area I knew had access to an old, unused water line that predated the current grid. Most engineers had forgotten about these legacy systems, but I'd mapped them during my private aquifer project. I found a family, a mother and 2 children, collecting condensation from air conditioning units into bottles, inefficient and potentially contaminated. I approached cautiously, identifying myself as a water engineer. Initially suspicious, the mother became desperate when I mentioned clean water. Her youngest was already showing signs of dehydration. I could have kept that water knowledge for myself. Maybe I should have. But some things matter more than survival. I showed them how to access the old water line and set up a basic sand and charcoal filtration system from materials in their home. The gratitude in their eyes as they drank clean water for the first time in days haunted me as I moved on. I couldn't save everyone, but maybe I could create pockets of survival. By the 4th day, I discovered something terrifying. My name was on a target list. While scavenging supplies from an abandoned corner store, I overheard a military radio transmission, specifically mentioning key water authority personnel who remained unaccounted for. They were hunting us. They wanted our knowledge of the systems, the back doors, the unofficial access points that weren't on standard plans. They named me specifically: Priority Target, Thorn Remains at Large. Last known location, Sector 7. Special skills in aquifer mapping and legacy system access. They weren't just looking for anyone with water expertise. They had my name, my file. They knew exactly what I knew about the backup systems. I began using the underground water tunnels exclusively for movement. The main tunnels were being patrolled, but the narrower service conduits were overlooked. Moving through the city unseen, I witnessed its dying gasps from below. Neighborhoods that had been vibrant communities days ago were now ghost towns or battlegrounds. The military controlled the official water distribution points, requiring ID and registration for rations. Those who registered disappeared into relocation centers. Those who didn't slowly died of thirst. I kept thinking about Rodriguez. Had he made it back to the facility only to be captured? Was he one of the employees loaded onto those transport vehicles? The uncertainty drove me to take greater risks, checking locations where employees might be held. On the 5th day, I found him. Or rather, what remained of him. His body was near a looted convenience store, a single gunshot wound to the head, execution style. His pockets had been emptied except for his notebook, the one where he kept his personal notes about the water systems. Too technical for most people to understand its value. I took it, adding his knowledge to mine, and promised his unhearing ears that his death wouldn't be meaningless. Rodriguez had discovered something I hadn't. Evidence of a secondary control system for the Rainmaker technology. His hastily scribbled notes suggested the weather manipulation had a physical infrastructure component somewhere in our region, a control node. His final entry read, "Weather weapons equals vulnerable at initialization points. Water cycle cannot be permanently broken." The city was dying of thirst around me. That afternoon I witnessed a man stab another over a bottle of water that wasn't even clean. 3 armed people pursued the attacker for the bottle. None of them would survive the week without proper hydration. The military announcements became more frequent, promising water and safety at their resource centers. But I'd seen the classified documents. Those centers were sorting facilities, determining who was worth the resources to keep alive. By the 5th day, I made my decision. I needed to reach the hidden aquifer I'd been mapping before this all started. Located 15 miles outside the city proper, it was deep enough to be unaffected by surface contamination and unknown to authorities. If I could reach it, I could potentially save dozens of lives. Maybe more if Rodriguez's notes about the Rainmaker's vulnerability proved accurate. I gathered supplies from an abandoned water maintenance station, tools specifically designed for accessing deep water sources, additional filtration materials, and a hand-operated pump system. I created a portable water testing kit using chemicals from the station's supply cabinet. The journey would be dangerous, but staying would mean certain death, either from thirst or a military bullet. As night fell on the 5th day, I left the dying city behind, moving under cover of darkness. The once busy highway leading west was a graveyard of abandoned vehicles. I stayed off the main roads, using drainage culverts and irrigation channels as my path. Every step took me closer to the only water source they didn't know about, and the only chance I had of fighting back against those who had weaponized the rain itself. The journey was 15 miles of constant danger. Military drones patrolled regularly, their infrared sensors searching for unauthorized movement. I traveled primarily at night, hiding during daylight hours. Water became my most precious resource. I had only what I could carry, carefully rationed by the capful. My years of studying water conservation came down to preserving every drop in my own body. I encountered others fleeing the city, some in groups, others alone. Most were already showing signs of severe dehydration. I shared what little information I could about finding water, condensation collection points, which plants indicated shallow groundwater, without revealing my ultimate destination. Trust was as scarce as water itself. On the evening of the 6th day, I reached the outer boundary of the aquifer site. From my vantage point on a low ridge, I could see something unexpected. A small encampment had already formed near where my geological surveys indicated the aquifer was most accessible. Had someone else discovered it? Military? Civilians? I observed them carefully through my binoculars. Their movements lacked military precision. They had makeshift shelters, crude water collection systems. These were survivors, not soldiers. I had a choice: avoid them entirely, find another access point to the aquifer, or approach and risk everything on the chance they might be allies rather than threats. I watched them for hours, noting details. Children among them. Elderly. Their water collection was inefficient. They'd found the aquifer but were struggling to access it properly. I could have turned away, found somewhere else, but I saw children in that camp. I had to try. I approached the camp with my hands visible, water engineer ID prominently displayed. They spotted me immediately. 3 men with improvised weapons moved to intercept me. "That's far enough," one called out. Older man, military bearing, probably a veteran. "State your business." "My name is Ezekiel Thorne. I'm a water systems engineer from New Orleans," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I mapped this aquifer 6 months ago. I can help you access it properly." The mention of water expertise changed their demeanor slightly, but suspicion remained. "We've had military patrols through here twice," the veteran said. "How do we know you're not with them?" I slowly reached into my pack and removed the portable filtration system I'd built. "Because I've been running from them for days. They want people like me for our knowledge. I can show you how to triple your water output from this aquifer without contaminating the source. And I can prove it in 5 minutes." They conferred briefly, then allowed me to approach under watch. The camp was larger than it appeared from a distance, about 25 people, mostly families who had fled the city early. They'd found the aquifer by luck, noticing the slightly greener vegetation in the area during their escape. They'd dug down and hit water, but their collection methods were primitive and their filtration system inadequate. I demonstrated a better method for accessing the aquifer, using concepts any water engineer would know but were foreign to them. Within an hour, we had improved their water flow significantly and set up a proper filtration system using sand, charcoal, and cloth layers. When clear water began flowing at triple their previous rate, I was cautiously welcomed. Their leader was Gloria, a former hospital administrator who had organized the evacuation of her neighbors when the crisis began. The military veteran was Marcus, who had combat experience from conflicts overseas. They had basic supplies and a surprising amount of food. Several of them were urban gardeners who had brought seed stocks and knowledge. That first evening at the camp, I shared what I knew about the Rainmaker technology and the military's plans for water control. In turn, they shared information about military movements they'd observed and rumors from other refugee groups. Together, we began to form a clearer picture of what was happening across the region. "The military is establishing hard boundaries around water sources," Marcus explained. "Anyone who doesn't register for their water program is classified as an autonomous resource consumer and subject to relocation or worse." Gloria added, "Medical supplies are being similarly controlled. They're creating dependency by design." I showed them Rodriguez's notebook, explaining the hints about the Rainmaker's vulnerabilities. If his theory is correct, the weather manipulation isn't permanent. It requires ongoing operation of control nodes. If we could locate one— "That's suicide," Marcus interrupted. "Those would be the most heavily guarded installations." He was right, of course, but Rodriguez's notes suggested something else. The control technology had weaknesses. The weather manipulation required constant adjustment, constant monitoring. It wasn't a fire-and-forget weapon. Someone had to maintain it. "We don't need to destroy it," I explained. "We just need to understand it better. If we can predict its effects, maybe we can work around them." find places it can't reach or can't affect as strongly. By morning of the 7th day, we had established a more efficient water collection and storage system. My knowledge combined with their manpower made it possible to create a sustainable water source for the entire group. For the first time since the crisis began, I felt something close to hope. That afternoon, Marcus spotted a military drone during his perimeter check. We quickly covered our water collection system and retreated to the camouflaged shelters. The drone circled for 20 minutes before moving on. They were expanding their search grid. It was only a matter of time before patrols found us. We need to be more mobile, I suggested. Set up similar systems at other potential aquifer sites. Spread our risk. Gloria agreed, and we began planning expeditions to locations I had mapped previously. Looking at my geological surveys, I identified 3 additional sites within a day's journey that showed promise. We would need to split into teams, establish communication protocols, create recognition signals. As we planned, I began teaching others the basics of water engineering, how to identify potential underground sources, how to construct filtration systems, how to test for contamination. Knowledge shared was knowledge preserved. If anything happened to me, my skills wouldn't be lost. That evening, a family arrived at our perimeter, parents and 2 children severely dehydrated. They had fled a military resource center after witnessing people being separated by age and ability. They were taking the younger, stronger ones somewhere else, the father explained after we'd given them water and food. The rest were being processed for appropriate resource allocation. It matched the documents I had seen, population engineering through water control. We absorbed the new family into our group, assigning them roles based on their skills. The mother had been a chemistry teacher, invaluable for water testing. The father had construction experience. Even the children could help with gathering certain filtration materials. That night, I took first watch, scanning the horizon for signs of military movement. The stars were unusually bright, a side effect of the atmospheric manipulation, perhaps. The artificial drought had cleared the sky of clouds completely. I thought about Rodriguez's final notes. Water cycle cannot be permanently broken. There was something there, something important that I was missing. I was still pondering this when Marcus came to relieve me at midnight. "You should get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we start the expeditions to the other aquifer sites." As I settled into my makeshift bed, I heard distant engines, military patrols moving closer to our position. Their search pattern was expanding. We were running out of time. I awoke before dawn to urgent whispers. A patrol had been spotted on the road 2 miles east, moving in our direction. We implemented our emergency protocol. The camp separated into pre-assigned groups, each taking different routes to our designated fallback positions. Gloria led the majority of the group, including the families with children, toward the most promising secondary aquifer site. Marcus took a smaller team to create a diversion if necessary. I went with a third group to establish an observation post where we could monitor military movements. From our elevated position, we watched the patrol methodically search the area. They had equipment I hadn't seen before, some kind of ground-penetrating sensors they were using to detect underground water sources. They were getting smarter in their searches, specifically looking for aquifers now. They found our abandoned camp by midday, but our camouflage techniques had hidden the actual access point to the aquifer. They spent hours searching the wrong area before moving on. We reconvened at the secondary site that evening. Gloria's team had successfully established a new water collection system. We now had 2 functioning water sources and a mobile community with distributed knowledge. The immediate crisis of survival had been addressed. Now we could start thinking about the longer term. For the first time in a week, I slept without one eye open. We had water, we had skills, we had each other. It wasn't much, but it was a start. On the morning of the 7th day, we formalized our organization into what we half-jokingly called the Water Underground. Each member had specific responsibilities based on their skills. My role was clear. I would train others in water location, extraction, and purification while continuing to analyze Rodriguez's notes about the Rainmaker technology. That brings me to now. Day 7, hiding in this auxiliary control room beneath our secondary site. A military patrol passed overhead about 20 minutes ago. They're getting closer to finding us. That's why I'm recording this, as insurance against the knowledge being lost if they succeed. I believe Rodriguez was right about the Rainmaker's vulnerabilities. His notes indicate the system requires constant calibration through a network of ground-based monitoring stations. The weather manipulation isn't a single event, but an ongoing process. Like any system, it has feedback loops that can be disrupted. The key insight came when studying the atmospheric data he collected. The Rainmaker technology doesn't actually destroy water. It relocates it. The moisture removed from our region is being deposited elsewhere. The water cycle continues. They've just hijacked it for their own purposes. But natural systems tend toward equilibrium. Push them too far in one direction, and they'll eventually snap back. This means two things. First, their control isn't absolute. There will be areas where the effect is weaker due to natural geographical features, mountain ranges, large bodies of water, underground systems that interact with the water table. Second, maintaining this control requires infrastructure that's vulnerable. If you're watching this and trying to survive, look for these geographical features. Deep aquifers are your best bet. The deeper, the better, as they're less affected by surface conditions. Areas with significant underground cave systems often have water sources the Rainmaker can't easily reach. Old mines that extend below the water table. Natural springs emerging from deep geological formations. I've marked several promising locations on the maps stored with this recording. Some I've personally verified. Others are educated guesses based on geological surveys. The most reliable indicator is vegetation. Certain deep-rooted plants will continue to access water even during manufactured drought. Learn to identify cottonwoods, willows, and certain cactus species that indicate underground water. The water purification techniques we've developed are simple but effective. Layer sand, charcoal, and cloth in a container with small holes at the bottom. Pour collected water through this filter repeatedly. Boil the filtered water when possible. If boiling isn't an option, expose clear containers of water to direct sunlight for at least 6 hours. The UV radiation helps kill pathogens. For finding and accessing underground water sources, look for subtle depressions in otherwise flat terrain, unusually green vegetation patches, or areas where morning dew forms more heavily. Test dig in these locations, going down at least 6 feet before ruling an area out. Once you hit moisture, dig wider rather than deeper to create a collection pool. Cover it immediately to prevent evaporation. Wait, I hear movement above again. They're circling back. I'll continue, but more quietly. Our group has developed recognition signals to identify other survivors who might join us. We leave 3 stacked stones near water sources, with the middle stone being white if possible. It's simple enough to appear natural, but distinctive enough to be recognized by those who know what to look for. Now, about fighting back against those who deployed the Rainmaker. Rodriguez's notes suggest the local control node is disguised as a weather monitoring station. There are 3 such stations within 50 miles of New Orleans that fit the profile. Automated facilities with military security and unusual power requirements. We've begun reconnaissance of these locations, carefully documenting patrol patterns and security measures. The most promising target is the station southwest of the city. It shows signs of recent construction and has power lines far exceeding the needs of a standard weather station. More importantly, the military presence there is continuous, with regular supply deliveries. They wouldn't devote those resources to a simple monitoring post. Our plan isn't to attack it directly. That would be suicide with our limited resources. Instead, we're gathering information, looking for weaknesses in their operational procedures. If Rodriguez was right, disrupting their monitoring capability even temporarily could create a window where natural weather patterns reassert themselves. Even a brief return of rainfall would be invaluable for communities in hiding. I believe the Rainmaker technology has another vulnerability. It was designed for use against foreign adversaries, not for long-term domestic control. The system requires regular maintenance and adjustment. As their technicians encounter unexpected weather interactions and system degradation, they'll need to bring in specialists. That's where we might find an opportunity. The patrol seems to have moved on. I should finish this recording while I can. If you're hiding and surviving like us, know that you're not alone. Small groups like ours are forming throughout the affected regions. We're establishing communication networks using old radio equipment and courier systems. Information is being shared, resources pooled. Resistance is organizing not through violence, but through survival and connection. For those still in military-controlled areas, be cautious about the water they provide. Our tests show it often contains sedatives and compliance drugs. Collect rainwater when possible, even the slight condensation that forms overnight. Filter everything, regardless of source. Underground, in the dark, I've found more humanity than above. People working together, sharing what little they had. It gave me hope. In our camp, former strangers now protect each other like family. A doctor who escaped a resource center treats our illnesses. A former farm worker teaches us which wild plants are safe. A radio technician maintains our communication equipment. Together, we're stronger than any of us could be alone. The patrol is definitely gone now. I should rejoin the others. We're heading out tonight to establish another water collection point at the third aquifer site. Splitting our resources and people between multiple locations gives us redundancy and safety. If one site is compromised, the others continue. I'm recording this not just to document what happened, but because the knowledge I have might save others. If you're watching this, you're not alone. There are people out there who've learned to survive. People who remember what cooperation means. Find them. Join them. Share what you know. Look for our signs near water sources. Follow the deepest plant roots. Learn to read the land for what it's trying to tell you about where water hides. The military controls the cities and main roads, but they can't control every mile of wilderness, every forgotten mine shaft, every underground stream. They weaponize the rain, thinking they could control us by controlling water. But they forgot something important. I've spent my life making water flow where it shouldn't. And I'm not stopping now. This isn't the end of our story. It's just the beginning of a different one. Stay alive, find water, find each other, and if you can, find us. We'll leave signs only. Water people will recognize. 3 stacked stones. The middle one, white, water below. Hope remains. Our group is gathering now. We move only at night, using the stars for navigation since GPS is unreliable. We've learned to walk without leaving obvious tracks, to make camps that can be evacuated in minutes, to communicate without electronic devices. I see Gloria signaling that it's time to move. Marcus has scouted a clear path to our next location. The others are ready, packs loaded with only essentials. The children no longer cry from thirst. The elderly can walk farther each day as their strength returns. We're adapting, surviving, planning. Tonight we establish another safe haven. Tomorrow we continue gathering intelligence on the Rainmaker control node. The day after, Perhaps we make contact with another survivor group reported to the west. And someday, maybe someday soon, we'll find a way to make the rain fall again.